We are at the halfway point of the NHL season, and we've got a ton to talk about today. So we're going to jump right into it. This is the latest on the fourth period, presented by CCM Hockey. I'm Kate Pettersson, joined by David Pagnotta. And Dave, wouldn't be surprising if we led with Vancouver today because there has been so much chatter over the last few weeks. And in
Yep.
terms of trade talk specifically, names like J.T. Miller and Elias Pettersson have been floated. But if we don't see some sort of blockbuster deal happening over the next few weeks, what are some other moves that you're hearing Vancouver could be thinking about making?
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for them to make a deal of this magnitude involving either Elias Pettersson or JT Miller mid-season. Not impossible, but difficult. There are a lot of hurdles that come around dealing a player of this stature on either guy's front. So as they continue to navigate those discussions, and there are teams that are going to continue to poke around, Buffalo in the mix, Minnesota, the Rangers obviously tied to JT Miller, Detroit, other teams too. As they continue to navigate those waters, they're also having other discussions with other teams about other potential moves. We all know it's no secret they want to bring in a top four defenseman. Even with Filip Hronek out, when he comes back, they still want to bring in a top four defenseman. They also want to bring in, if they can, a mid-six offensive weapon that they can add to their mix. Now, the salary cap certainly plays a factor here, and obviously they have to figure out what type of assets they want to move in and out. But that's something else that they are discussing. Now, going back to Petey and JT Miller, again, deals of these magnitude are going to be difficult. You're talking, there was a lot of discussion surrounding Dylan Cousins and Bowen Byram as a potential fit. I think if you're looking at defensemen, Vancouver may be leaning in the direction of Owen Power as a priority versus a Bowen Byram. But these are big type of deals that have to get constructed. And again, no guarantees it happens, no guarantees it doesn't, but it's going to be a big hurdle for them to climb if they get to that point for Vancouver management.
Well, speaking of hurdles, they were shut out by Nashville on Friday night. Now they're in Montreal tonight. And then their next six in a row after this are against top nine teams in the league. So they've got a hurdle in terms of the schedule and what's next. So we'll keep an eye on that. But staying in the West, let's take a look at Anaheim because they did some housekeeping over the weekend. They got creative, in fact, with a 3-year extension for Frank Vetrano. And now, if we're looking at some other pieces, are we talking about John Gibson potentially being on the trading block? And if he isn't, what's the status? What's the future look like for him?
Well, Kate, he's got 2 more years left on his contract after this season, $6.4 million cap hit. He's got an appetite to chase a championship. The Ducks have an appetite to retain money on his deal. It's just a matter of finding the right spot. Now, the Vetrano signing, along with the addition of Jacob Trouba, kind of shows that this team is starting to take the next steps in their rebuild. They have a few other pieces on expiring deals that they could potentially move in Robbie Fabry and Brock McGinn up front. And they already traded out Cam Fowler, giving him a chance to compete with St. Louis. And that's kind of where they're at with John Gibson. So whether it's Carolina or even Edmonton, these are going to be some teams that are going to kind of continue to poke around to see if they can get the right deal in place. Are the Ducks willing to retain half of Gibson's contract, the remaining contract, the $6.4 million hit? That's going to be something that some teams are curious about, and those discussions are likely to pick up over these next 2 months. We're 2 months and a day away from the trade deadline. These discussions are going to pick up. Our segments are going to pick up. There's going to be a lot of activity, but John Gibson is going to be a focal point for the Ducks and for a few teams that are looking to shore up their goaltending position.
Well, you mentioned Edmonton, and the Oilers are second in the NHL in point percentage in their last 18 games. They've gone 14-3-1, so they've been solid. And I wonder about Evander Kane. Do you have an update on him? And how much does his health impact which way the Oilers are looking over the next 2 months come trade deadline?
Yeah, it's going to play a big factor. What ends up happening with him now? The update is there is no update yet. The Oilers are going to reevaluate his status and where he's at health-wise. The initial prognosis was he was going to be out until the end of February. If there have been any setbacks in his recovery and he is going to miss the rest of the regular season, well, the Oilers need to know that because that could potentially free up an additional $5.25 million in cap space that they can use as LTIR overage in order to add something. We know they want to look at a defenseman. Does this now, if he is out, put them in a position to add a more profiled defenseman on the back end? Can they add in other areas? Is Gibson a potential target? Does that free things up? So that's what the Oilers over the next couple of weeks, my understanding is anyway, are going to reevaluate Evander Kane's health status, see where he's at to get a realistic timeline. Is he on track? Have things been derailed a little bit? Is he not likely to come back till playoffs? Is it March? If he is back in the regular season, it's relatively status quo, but they need to figure that out. They'd like to know sooner rather than later.
Let's jump over to the East and talk a little bit about Philly. They've been inconsistent this season, but they're 2 points back of a wild card spot. And I will note in that Eastern Conference wild card race, there are 7 teams within 4 points of those 2 spots. So it's kind of crazy. It will be cool if 2 months from now we're still talking about how logjam that is, and it really comes down to a race to the finish. But for Philly, they don't have any major pieces that are UFAs come July. So what's going on there? What are they looking at doing?
Yeah, they're maintaining their course of their rebuild, and there's another team that's starting to take the next steps in that process. But as you said, they don't have any impact guys that are on expiring contracts that are set for UFA status in July. I think it's just Eric Johnson, quite frankly, who's the only regular part of the roster who's going to be a pending unrestricted free agent. They have guys with term, whether it's Rasmus Ristolainen on the back end or even Scott Laughton up front, who has another year left on his contract. Those are players that have generated interest before. Philly and Danny Briere, their GM, they're going to continue to listen, but it doesn't look like they're in much of a position to be a big player in a seller's market. I think they're going to look, explore, see what options are available to them. If a team approaches them about a guy like Laughton, who has a $3 million cap hit, very palatable for a team looking to shore up their bottom six, even their mid six, that could be a target. And the one extra year is attractive. But we'll see kind of how things develop. They're not in a rush to make any impact type moves. They want to continue to see how their younger kids develop and how this team and this roster can perform down the stretch.
Great. A couple more things to touch on. I posted on Instagram. I said, let me know what you guys want to hear us talk about. And a handful of you asked to find out what you thought about Nashville. We know they had a tough start. They've started to find their footing a little bit here in the middle part of the season. Do you think they're buyers or are they sellers? What is Barry Trotz doing at the deadline?
Yeah, buying cautiously, but
Okay.
buying in a sense of adding a longer term piece. This isn't focusing on this season, get one asset, suddenly change your season around. They know what cards they've been dealt. They're now focused on next season. So Barry's going to look around to see what's available there. Gustav Nyquist is on an expiring deal. He'll likely generate some interest going into the deadline. That might be the only bigger piece that they end up selling. But for Barry Trotz, he's focused on next season. If they can look at hockey type moves, that might be a priority for them.
Yeah, he's expressed it so far this year. He's not just grabbing stuff off the shelves
Right.
for the sake of it. He's
Yeah.
got a long term plan. It's a long term game. Okay, speaking of long term, there's some buzz around Arizona that a group of political leaders and business people in the area have gotten together and are making a bid for an NHL franchise to bring hockey back to Arizona. What's the timeline, the likelihood? What are you hearing on that?
Yeah, the committee that's been put together by the Maricopa County is to find the right pieces in place to go through a formal process of exploring an NHL expansion franchise. It's very early in the process. This is kind of step one, but in speaking to NHL sources over at the league, they're pleased with this. It shows to them that the local market is serious about bringing NHL hockey back to the market, and Maricopa includes Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe, among others. But they want to see that possibility. And Matt Isaiah, who owns the Phoenix Suns, has gone on record of saying he wants to see NHL hockey back in the market. We'll see if he gets involved in this group as well, and perhaps on an ownership front level down the road. But the league's priority is to make sure they've got the right plan in place, the right group, and they will not consider any potential until there is an arena plan that is secure, sound, and ready to roll. They have that, then they can pursue ownership and then look at expansion. The league is going to grow. We're going to 34 soon, eventually get to 36, and then I think that's going to be the cap. Whether Arizona's part of this next wave or the one after, obviously we'll have to wait and see. But the local market wants NHL hockey back, And now that they've got that mess of previous ownership out of the way, they want to focus on doing this the right way.
For sure. And I think what you've seen in Utah with the way that they've been able to use the Jazz facilities, perhaps that's the easiest way to integrate that into something that's already in existence. Okay, lastly, outdoor games in the NHL. We saw the Winter Classic on New Year's Eve, and now the league is getting ready for the Stadium Series, which will be in March in Ohio. Rumblings on X, on Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Everyone's wondering where are the games going to be next year. What can you tell us there?
Well, it's obviously been well reported, and we've touched on this as well. The Florida Panthers are set to host an event game next season, as are the Tampa Bay Lightning. From what I've been told, the NHL will make an announcement later this week unveiling the Winter Classic, some of the Stadium Series games. Perhaps there's going to be more, but that will be unveiled later in the week. Who gets what? We'll have to wait and see, but expect some news on that this week.
All right. Well, it's shaping up to be an exciting month of January already. And of course, we've got a couple more months of the regular season still to go. So we'll keep you all posted here on the latest on the fourth period presented by CCM Hockey. I'm Kate Pettersson. And Dave, thanks so much for your insight here today.